Hello everyone. Today we will be talking about one of the most well-known and possibly one of the most paranormal places on Earth, and the story behind it that made it so well known today. That's right, today we will be talking about a place you've almost definitely already heard of, and that is Skinwalker Ranch. But before we get into the strange happenings that occurred at this ranch that reached fame through how traumatized it left the Sherman family, we need to discuss just what makes this land cursed in the first place. And then we'll get into what happened to the Sherman family and after they owned it to a well-known billionaire named Robert Bigelow and a team of scientists who were working with him after he purchased the ranch from the Shermans in 1996. He owned the ranch until 2016 and spent his time investigating it until 2004, finding some crazy stuff. Everyone, welcome to the channel. My name is MrLex, and if you are new to the channel, we talk about all manner of things, paranormal, dark, and scary, so if that interests you and you enjoyed the video, please leave us a like and a comment, and if you really like the video, then subscribe and tap the bell, because we'll be uploading content on any and everything strange, paranormal, and scary very frequently, so we appreciate all the support that you can give us. Now, on to the story. Skinwalker Ranch is a 512-acre plot of land located southeast of Ballard, Utah, near Skinwalker Canyon and a little under 4 hours away from the lesser-known Area 52, well, nicknamed Area 52. The actual name is Dugway Proving Ground, which has its own myriad of strange reports, located in a state which also happens to border Nevada, the home of the famous Area 51 that everybody is known about since the Area 51 raid and way before that because of the strange alien experiments and stuff they supposedly do there. So, within a relatively short distance of each other, you have multiple different areas, all famous for a strange phenomenon. Now, the name of Skinwalker Ranch derives itself from the Native American legend, and it's a curse actually, supposedly done by the Navajo shamans, and they cursed this land when the Utes were actually taking other Native Americans and putting them into slavery and selling them to the United States. So this caused a dispute between the Navajo and the Utes, and as it came out, the Navajo, cursed the land before the Utes could come in and force them off of it and into slavery. And in retaliation, the Navajo laid down a nasty curse. And the curse, as we all know, is called the Curse of the Skinwalker. And the legend claims that the curse would cause witches to descend down upon the land, wearing skin of animals such as wolves and among other predators. Or simply, they would just take the form of these animals and wreak havoc to anyone that dares to walk along the land of Skinwalker Ranch or Skinwalker Canyon in general. And nowadays, the ranch itself is just off limits to the public and currently owned by Brandon Fugel via Adamantium Real Estate LLC. So you can't actually go there currently. Not that any of the Navajo at least would, because they are very scared of the Skinwalker and the curse. But yeah, the ranch is very much off limits today, with all of the roads leading to it being blocked off by armed security, barbed wire fencing, signs telling people to stay off the property. So just don't waste your time. They shoot a TV show there to investigate this stuff now with one of the most famous scientists in America. His name is Travis. I can't remember his last name off the top of my head. I apologize. But don't waste your time attempting to investigate it, because you're just not going to be able to. And they treat it as though it is a very dangerous location. Because if, at least up until 2004, it definitely was. The reported activity on the ranch, though, didn't truly begin until it was purchased by the Sherman family back in 1994, after it was abandoned by the previous owners, Kenneth and Edith Myers, for reasons that were never made public. However, according to them, they never experienced any strange activity on the ranch, which is actually contradictory to the claims of Terry Sherman and Robert Bigelow, both of which claim to have had paranormal experiences on this property. Considering the fact that this family may have just not had an interest in being in the public eye the way that the ranch caused the Shermans to be, they may simply have lied to avoid talking to the press about it and losing their privacy, or worse, being publicly ridiculed as crazy. And considering the repercussions that immediately followed with Terry and his wife, coming out with their experiences at the ranch and confiding in people they thought were close friends, thinking that, they weren't going to tell anybody else, and how dastardly this turned out for them, I cannot blame them. I mean, Terry's wife lost her job over it just because she spoke to somebody about it. I mean, the kids were ridiculed. It's just a long story of unfortunate events. But the Shermans received an amazing deal on the ranch when they first bought it. So, it is what it is for them. They noticed a lot of strange stuff when they first moved in, but it didn't click right away because it was such a good deal. And they got this ranch way below market value. When Terry and Gwen Sherman moved into the ranch, they had no idea of any of the legends behind the ranch, and allegedly, when they moved in, thought nothing of the fact that every single door and window in the house had deadbolts and locks on them. Every door in the house had these heavy-duty locks that, whether it was leading outside or into another room inside the property itself. And to top it off, the place was essentially trashed, with grass being overgrown like it hadn't been mowed in years, and the house itself being in terrible overall shape. And they also noticed these poles that are in the front and the back of the house where it looked like they had massive chains holding guard dogs at one point. And they did find this strange, but in their minds it boiled down to maybe the previous owners were just paranoid and really into home security, because it's not uncommon. There are a lot of people that are like that. You're in the middle of nowhere and it's probably good to defend your property if somebody is targeting you for to rob you or something along those lines. So rather than raise concerns over it, none of this actually mattered to the Shermans that much, because this was quite literally their dream property. This would have likely made me or anyone else that were to buy this property ask questions regarding why they were so paranoid, since in my mind, you're in the middle of nowhere, you're probably unlikely to be bothered because people probably don't even know where you are unless they're following you home, and you would probably notice this, but not always. I understand the need for, security, self-defense and stuff no matter where you are, but I would still be questioning this a little more if it's really that heavy of a security setup. Maybe someone was trying to break in or something along those lines and target this isolated property, and that would cause concerns for me as the new owner, or probably anybody else. And if I'm being quite honest with you, I would probably have tried to get in contact with the prior owner somehow if possible to ask what the deal was, because I am, unlikely to be seeing something like that and just letting it go. But the Shermans were ranchers, and this vast expanse of land gave them a place to raise their cattle and make a living doing what they had always dreamed of doing, which, as I just said, was raising cattle. So they didn't let it concern them. It wasn't until after they started experiencing the strange phenomenon on the property that they would eventually dig into the history of this land and learn of the Navajo curse that was placed upon it. In reality, though, the experiences described by not only them, but also Robert Bigelow, the billionaire that would later purchase this ranch from the Shermans, and the, researchers for NIDS, or NIDS, his scientist team that started to research the ranch with him, stemmed far beyond what would be considered just a shape-shifting witch, and it reached into the realms of UFO sightings, alien visitation, even ghostly spirits, apparitions, and other interdimensional phenomenon like EBs, extra dimensional entities that could come through at any point. Sorry, EB is extra biological entity, my mistake. But that would turn out that this property that they purchased, not only for the Shermans but even for Bigelow and all the researchers from the government that were there with him, this property would be so crazy it would flip everything they thought they knew about reality right upside down on its head. Now, when the Shermans are first moving in, what is likely the most well-known incident that occurred on the ranch takes place when Terry notices something off in the distance in his property. It's up in the tree line, and he and his family were unloading their stuff into the house, and they see what appears to be a large wolf, and Terry lets his family know, and the whole family just comes over. He said, "Hey, come over here, look at this, there's something huge over at the tree line, it's a wolf." That's not a good thing in his mind because it's a predator. But the whole family comes over and they start standing by the truck, and they're watching this wolf from several hundred yards away. And there was a large fence out near where this wolf was, and the fence was rather big. I mean, it wasn't a small one. The spaces between the fence were about 6 feet apart, and as you got near the fence, as the wolf got near the fence, Terry could see that this wolf was about the same length as the distance between fence posts. And Terry is thinking that this has to be the biggest wolf that I have ever seen. The wolf gets closer to them. It's approaching Terry and his family, and at this point, it's about 100 yards away, and this massive wave of just calm energy simply washes over Terry and his family. And rather than go and get their guns and do something to either kill or deter the wolf from coming any closer and, immediately retaliating. Instead, they just stand there and watch this wolf as it gets closer to them. Eventually, this wolf is right up on them, and rather than attack them, instead it comes up to them and it acts like a well-trained house pet. Terry has no idea why they feel this calm around such a large, scary creature, and nobody else did there either. They just had no fear. But the wolf goes up straight to Terry's father, and his father just starts petting this wolf as though it were a giant dog. And the wolf responded happily, rubbing its head up against his hand and wagging its tail, and then it eventually starts walking away. It does nothing to the family. Now, over in an enclosure, Terry had a pen with a couple of calves and cows inside, and one of the calves that was inside of this enclosure had stuck its head through one of the holes to, peer outside of the pen to see what was going on with this wolf. And suddenly, the wolf notices, and primal instinct takes over, and this wolf just tries to grab the head of this baby calf and attempts to pull it out of the enclosure through this small hole, but it fails because this hole is just too small, so the cow just will not come through the enclosure. And with the calf's head now in this enormous wolf's mouth, the Shermans snap out of the weird trance that they are in, and they begin attacking this wolf, trying to get it to release the calf. And for a while, they had no luck at this. Their livestock was their money, and they needed this wolf to go away because livestock is expensive. They begin firing at the wolf with a handgun. The wolf seems completely unfazed by this, and they proceed to run up and hit the wolf in the back of the head with an axe. And eventually the wolf does let go of the calf and walks off, realizing that it wasn't going to come out of the enclosure. The cow's staying, and obviously with the Shermans giving them, giving the wolf an extra, obstacle, I guess the wolf just figured it wasn't worth it. Terry realizes that this thing cannot be left alive to roam their property and kill more cattle, so he fires a round out of his high-powered rifle, and he hits the wolf, but it does seemingly no damage to it at all. This wolf seems to be basically immortal, and rather than roll over and die, it wanders off into the woods and disappears, which causes Terry and his sons to try to go after it and track this wolf down and kill it. So they grab their guns and they go after it, but before they do, they notice this putrid odor that the wolf had left behind. I mean, it really reeked. It was just terrible. But with how strange the overall situation was, the odor really was the least of their concerns because they just got this ranch. They need their cattle to stay alive, and yeah, it's strange, it's a giant wolf, but they need to stop this thing from killing their cows. But what would go on after this first event would cause the Sherman family a great deal more strife than if they had just lost some of their cows. I mean, the turmoil that they're going to experience while living on this property would later, which would later become known as Skinwalker Ranch, is just, it's sad and it's crazy. And unless, they had all this evidence backing it up, if they didn't have somebody like Bigelow to back up their claims, everybody would call them crazy. And also, that strange feeling of calm that they claim to have experienced when that wolf showed up, well, it happens to be oddly similar, in my mind at least, to accounts of people who claim to be UFO abductees, where they claim to feel serene and calm in the presence of these alien beings right before being taken onto their ships. So it could be a sign that maybe they were dealing with something similar to what these people claim to have been in contact with, alien beings. Maybe this was actually an alien and a complete hallucination. Who knows? Now, when Terry and his son go after this wolf, they make their way into the woods. They follow these footsteps of this giant creature, and these wolf's footsteps, they were just huge. They bore super deep into the earth. And as they were following these footsteps, they came up to this clearing, and once they reached this muddy clearing where these footsteps were at, they just stopped altogether. And there's no place the wolf could have went unless it went up, and, this giant creature just evaded them. It was just gone. So Terry and his son returned to the house to tell the rest of the family, what just happened. That they followed this thing into the woods, they found nothing, only footsteps, not even blood from where they had shot it. And the wolf just vanished without a trace, so they didn't know what to think. This is the first day of the family stay at the ranch, and they are just distraught and have no idea what to make of what they just experienced. And the fact that this wolf now is freely roaming around their property and is apparently bulletproof, well, how do you deal with something like this? And even more important for Terry is, is my family going to be safe living here? Is is this what all the beefed up home security was about? But he still doesn't think too heavily about it yet because, he's still a little bit infatuated about the ranch. He thinks, well, the wolf didn't attack us, so it's probably not a big deal, but the cattle's an issue, so it's still gotta go. Well, as we get further into the story, the answer to the question of whether this wolf was really dangerous or not will become more obvious, if it isn't already obvious to you. The family, though, is now completely anxious and, to keep sanity, attempting to treat it like this was just a normal predator issue, because they knew something was wrong, they just didn't want to admit it. So they try to take care of it to protect their farmland, and, in their minds, like, alright, we'll find this wolf, we'll take care of it, we'll get rid of it, and, it's just a normal predator problem, we just need to protect our cows and everything will be okay. After this, though, the woman of the house, Gwen Sherman, Terry Sherman's wife, begins to notice things that truly make her believe that she was starting to experience health issues relating to her memory. So things such as her going to the grocery store and coming home, then putting the groceries away, then she would walk away and come back only to realize that the groceries she has put away are all somehow now back in the bags, making her question if she ever put them away at all. Things like this occurring had her questioning her sanity, and this was like the first incident where she thought she had a memory lapse. The same day, though, she goes and takes a shower, and then she hangs the towel up, and she planned to use it to dry off when she got out, so she leaves it in the towel rack in the bathroom, she finishes her shower, she gets out, and then when she does, the towel is no longer on the rack. Trying not to think too hard on it, though, she grabs a new towel, she dries off, and then goes and finds the towel that she originally grabbed hanging up in a closet on the other side of the house. Something had made its way into the bathroom and took the towel that she had grabbed while she was in the bathroom, and knowing what we know about this place now, it's a pretty scary thought, because if you don't know the rest of the story, when you do know it, you'll understand. And many people also have fears of someone coming into the bathroom while they're showering, because you're naked and you're in your most vulnerable state, so it's definitely not a nice thought. However, she really doesn't think that it's anything to do with anything paranormal yet, or any other person messing with her, so instead she just chalks it up to her losing her memory and thinking that she did things she already did that she actually didn't do. Maybe she's thinking that she grabbed the towel, but it never actually happened. But it wasn't until something similar to this would happen to her husband that she realized, okay, something strange is actually happening here, and it's not just me, it's not just my memory, it's this property. Now, the incident that happened that caused her to realize this with Terry was that he was out digging holes for a new fence with this large 70-pound fence digging power tool called an auger. And he decided to take a break after digging a bunch of holes for the fence and decided to go inside and eat something. So he leaves the auger where he had dug the last fence post. He comes back out and then looks for his auger to dig the next hole, and it's nowhere to be found. The auger's just gone. And at first he goes inside, tries to be rational and asks everyone, hey, do you know where my auger went? I haven't, I left it outside, I was digging fence holes and I need it to continue my work. Is this, what's going on here? And everybody said, no, we have no idea where your auger is. We've been in the house the whole time. So Terry doesn't know what to think and he just lets it go. About a week goes by of not knowing where the auger was, and Terry one day, while patrolling his property for these giant wolves, because he's still trying to find them to stop his cattle from getting killed, he finds his auger, and it's about 70 feet up in the air, super far away from where he was digging, up in a tree. And like I said, this is not a light tool, it weighs 70 pounds. This auger was just, it was so big you could not, unless you were to climb up this tree as a human being and place it there, which you would need probably extra equipment, because trying to climb with an extra 70 pounds on your back is not a simple task. It would be very difficult to achieve this. You definitely can't just throw it 70 feet in the air. I mean, this is a big tool. So no human could have just came along and done this. Something really powerful had to have put that thing up in that tree. So Terry, now properly freaked out, goes back in the house and lets his family know about the auger being found, and he lets them know it was up in the tree, and it prompted his wife to finally tell Terry about her experiences with the groceries and the towels, which finally brought them together in saying, okay, something with this property is not right, and their fear factor starts to kick up. They start thinking more about the paranoia of the previous owners, and it really starts to make them scared, to continue living here. So they gotta try to figure out their options here. So now we get into one of the other things that this property is famous for. Terry would start seeing lights on his property. At first, when they moved in, Terry would see these lights far off in the distance at the end of the property, and he thought nothing of it, thinking they were just headlights and someone had wound up on his property, not knowing where they are, and they would just turn around and leave. Well, this started happening really frequently, and the lights didn't leave, so Terry decided that there was no way that these people could be lost, and he assumed that it was people illegally hunting on his land, which then prompts Terry to go and investigate. If I were Terry, I would kind of hope they were hunting wolves, but that's just me. And, Terry goes to investigate, and he and his family are already anxious and scared from all of the other strange occurrences, so this triggers an anger in Terry. His fight or flight response kicks in, and he wants to go take out his rage on whoever was illegally hunting on his property. However, this was far from what was actually happening. Terry rushes towards these lights, and he gets closer to them, and he realizes that the lights are not headlights. No. Instead, as he gets closer, he notices these lights have no sound. He realizes they're moving away from him. And this was well before electric vehicles were a thing back, early 1994, I think. So when Terry gets close to these lights and notices that there's no noise, he starts to get freaked out. And, these lights just moved away from him and up into the sky. He really is shook at this point. He has no idea how to explain what he just saw because he just wants answers. Because he had just witnessed a UFO for the first time in his life, and although it definitely would not be the last time, he's still understandably scared. And the winter after this rolls around, and the weather this winter is just nasty. Terry realizes that he had just lost one of his cows, so he ends up going on a search to find this missing cow. He searches his entire property, and there's only one part left of the property that he had yet to search, which was the area that the wolf had disappeared to on the first day that they moved into the property. So Terry goes to this location, and he finds footprints from the missing cow in the same spot where the wolf's footsteps had disappeared. This happened 4 more times this winter, and it would repeatedly be the same scenario, as if Terry was going insane, except that the cows were very much real and missing. Almost as if this location were some sort of portal that would just suck the animals up that came through it. If I had to theorize, I would say that the Skinwalker, aka the wolf that they had saw on their first day on the property, was coming onto the land from this spot and luring these cows to this location where, it would put them in this trance-like state and drag them through this portal to another dimension that this wolf originated from and have its way with the cows, whether that be eating them or, as we'll see later on, something much worse, because this turns out this is no normal wolf. Now, by the end of the winter, Terry is freaked out to levels of paranoia that some may even call crazy. He would literally hang out behind the bushes and spy on his own property with his guns, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever was causing his cattle to go missing and the strange phenomenon that was happening to his family so that he could take care of them and ultimately defend his family, his livelihood, and property from whatever these things were. And one night, as he's doing another fruitless search around his property, out of the corner of his eye, he catches what looks like a big black figure moving around in the trees on his land. He crouches down, trying to be stealthy behind a bush, and he notices this strange shape moving around the trees. Terry would later describe what he saw to be the shape of a stealth fighter jet, but far smaller, and hovering about 20 feet or so off the ground. If I had to draw a comparison, I would say what he saw sounds surprisingly similar to what was witnessed in Rendlesham Forest over in the UK, where a couple of soldiers saw what they claimed was a craft in the woods, which was described to be remarkably similar to the way that Terry describes this craft, only they actually got to touch the craft. Terry didn't get that far, and these soldiers were debriefed after they saw it, and they got back to base and told they saw nothing. That didn't happen for Terry, though, obviously, because it's his property and he's not in the Air Force. This is not an Air Force base. However, it does correlate extremely well when comparing what Terry saw to what these soldiers also saw on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. So Terry was just crouched down, not making a sound, and watching this craft, and it seems to have these strange lights just coming out of the craft, scanning the ground as if it were looking for something. And Terry moves a little bit closer to get a better angle on this thing, and the moment that he makes the smallest of noises from moving, somehow, from a ridiculous distance, this craft immediately notices him. It triggers a response. This craft immediately shuts its lights off and instantly angles itself so that it's looking directly at Terry, as if it was completely unaware that Terry was even there in the first place. Terry can feel in his gut immediately that this thing It heard the tiny little sound Terry had accidentally made, and he is now freaking out and unable to move, like he's terrified. All he could do now is just stare at this thing and think, holy crap, this thing is about to come for me next. What is this thing? Is this what's been stealing my cattle? Is it gonna do the same thing to me? Am I gonna die? But instead of, the craft just flies away and vanishes as if it had never even been there in the first place. At this point, things are going horribly wrong for Terry and his family. Not only have they been losing livestock for months, but now in the spring of 1995, the missing livestock actually starts to show back up on the Shermans' property. Only they didn't show up alive. They showed up mutilated with precise cuts, organs removed, and blood sucked out of them as if it was all surgically done. The skinwalkers that Terry had seen on his first day were not wolves at all. As I said before, it rather seems more likely that these were in fact shape-shifting aliens, and this is far beyond if the wolf had just been eating them. This is much more of a disgusting find. And it's at this point that Terry starts to realize we're dealing with something extraterrestrial. This is not something natural. And throughout history, there have been many cases where it is argued that, like, ancient gods may have actually been extraterrestrials. Stories told by the Mayans and ancient Egyptians, as well as many other cultures around the globe, and monuments and structures that have been built to such precise precision that without the tools we have today, these people should never have been able to actually build them. But they do exist, and you can still go see them today. A great example would be the Nazca Lines, large animal-shaped structures that are only visible from the sky that the native people actually should never have been able to build without an eye in the sky. But somehow they were able to be built, and they're still there today. You can fly over in an airplane and see them. But why on earth would people from ancient times have bothered building these structures in the first place? Maybe to serve as guide stones or ancient runways for visitors they called gods that were actually extraterrestrial visitors? I mean, is it possible that maybe what the Navajo summoned to Skinwalker Ranch was more than just a curse to bring in predatory shape-shifting witches? Maybe the curse that the Navajo left actually opened a portal, and maybe this portal on the ranch is allowing extraterrestrial entities to come through it with ancient ET calling cards that we no longer know how to use today. Or maybe you think Terry and the rest of his family are all liars and that nothing ever did happen at Skinwalker Ranch and this is all one big publicity stunt. Well, before you make your decision on what really went on at this property, allow me to share the rest of Terry's story, and then we will move on to the story of the scientific team employed by Robert Bigelow and Bigelow himself, who bought Terry's house and brought Terry on as an employee to work with them, and what they all experienced on the property. Let's just say that if he's lying, the government of the United States didn't seem to think so, because they had their own crack at investigating Skinwalker Ranch, and clearly they believed that something was happening there, and they wanted to know what it was. Now, in addition to the cattle mutilations, strange things just started happening at night at Terry's house to Terry and his family. Things just get more and more creepy. They start seeing these entities that are walking around in their property. These entities would have no expression, and they would just be walking around at night, and Terry and his family could see out the window of their house that sometimes, at night these entities would just walk straight up to the windows, and they would put their hands up against the glass and stare inside at Terry and his family like this. But there was no face. Terry and his family would have the blinds down, and they would use every deadbolt and door in the house with a lock on it. They could hear those things still, though, outside, and they would be just tapping on the glass and speaking in another language that they've never heard before. This would cause them to never sleep, and the lack of sleep in turn caused the kids to do poorly in school, and as I mentioned earlier in the video, it would cause the wife to confide in some of what was happening to people that she thought she could trust, and it turns out she could not trust them. Instead, they thought that she was going insane, and it resulted in her losing her job at the bank. There was no other reason for this termination of her losing her job, at least not according to Robert Bigelow. The whole family was ready to lose every last bit of sanity that they had, and a breakdown was imminent. I'm surprised at this point they didn't already have a breakdown. I would have been out of there by now. One night, though, Terry is sitting on his porch with his rifle, and he notices on the horizon something new. Something that he had yet to have ever witnessed before. A new orange orb off in the distance. And this causes Terry to lift up his rifle and use the scope and try to look off in the distance at this new orange light. And what he saw, he described as a portal. to another world or dimension. The orb had an oval shape to it, and as he's looking at it, he sees in the center of this orb what looks like this blue sky leading to an entirely different world, or maybe just a different place in our own world, where it's currently broad daylight, but he has no idea what he's looking at. But then, the real creepiness begins. A figure starts crawling out of this portal, and then another figure starts crawling out of this portal, and these are the figures that had been harassing him and his family at nighttime. Then one by one, these figures just start crawling out of the portal and start running off into the tree line to hide, and followed by them comes the weird craft Terry witnessed, that was in the tree searching for something, and they flew off into the tree line as well. Now, Terry knows where these strange phenomena have been coming from. It was these strange portals, and as crazy as it sounds, there is a little bit of verification for these portals later on. And all we know right now, though, is that these portals were definitely how the creatures that the family was witnessing were getting onto the property. And it is possible that the Navajo may have been the ones to open this portal up with the curse of the Skinwalker. In fact, it's highly likely. The portal then proceeds to shut and disappear. And after this night with the orange portal, Terry and his family start to notice the worst of the worst. They noticed these strange blue orbs, and this was by far, according to the family, the most terrifying thing of all that the family had ever experienced on the ranch. And considering everything that they had experienced up until now with the humanoid creatures, the strange craft, the giant wolves, the missing objects, the cattle mutilations, the list goes on, it says a lot about just how fear-invoking these mysterious orbs must have actually been. Because according to Terry and his family, these orbs, when they showed up, would just instill an innate sense of dread and anxiety inside of them, and they didn't understand why, but the orbs just did. These orbs were simply terrifying, and his family and Terry had never experienced such a terrifying event in their entire lives, and they had gone through a lot at this point. But the way that the family described these orbs is that whenever they would come near you, it would just fill you with the most extreme anxiety and fear possible, as though it was emitting some sort of strange energy that you just couldn't explain. Similar to the calming energy that the wolf was emitting, only the opposite in terms of how it made you feel. A polar opposite. However, as soon as the blue orb got out of there, the anxiety and the fear left with it. So, clearly the orbs were indeed the cause. Well, one night Terry sees one of these orbs on his property, and his 3 dogs just start going crazy barking, and they chase after it, which causes the orb to retreat. And Terry in his mind is thinking, holy crap, the orb's running away. We finally are going to overcome one of these odd occurrences for once, and my guard dogs are actually going to chase this orb off. Well, this victory was short-lived because it was never a victory at all. In fact, thinking he had finally won something, he then hears his dogs just start yelping. And he is so frozen with fear, such a broken man at this point, that he doesn't even bother to go into the woods after them and see what was occurring. Instead, he just goes inside, locks all the doors, and retreats for the night. As, if it were just a normal occurrence at this point, there was nothing he could do. And if it were me, I don't care if I'm broken or not. I'm grabbing my rifle and going after my dogs. I like my dogs. But, what can you do? He was just too far gone at this point. So, the next day, Terry and his son, they go off looking for the dogs in the woods. And when they get out there, they find a clearing. And with these 3 piles of ashes sitting in the clearing, they walk up to them and investigate. And they realize later on that these piles of ashes were the remains of his 3 dogs. Terry's dogs had been vaporized, and they were left as nothing, just a big pile of ashes. And at this point, Terry decides it's time to get out of this place. This is not a safe place for my family and I. We need to go. Terry would get lucky and sell the ranch to billionaire Robert Bigelow, and then a serious scientific research team would come in and start testing this place. The billionaire owner of the Mutual UFO Investigation Network, or MUFON for short, would buy this property and make it his headquarters for his scientific research, not only to investigate the ranch itself, but all of his scientific research goals in general, as Bigelow was extremely interested in UFOs and the paranormal. And as I mentioned earlier, despite not wanting to be at the ranch, Terry does take a job with Bigelow as the ranch manager because Bigelow and his team have zero experience in managing a ranch. And I guess because with all of these people around, Terry felt that, not having his family there, or at least not his kids, it made him feel more secure about being on that property because Gwen would come to assist him as ranch manager. He would be doing work there with his wife. Now, Robert Bigelow's team, which he had built before purchasing the ranch, was called the National Institute for Discovery Science, or NIDS for short. That's the team he brought on to investigate. Robert brought on the best scientists and PhD level experts that he could find, but he made sure that none of them had any interest in the paranormal, because he didn't want pre-existing beliefs on the subject to cause bias and mess up the investigations into the ranch, and the other subjects as well that he was planning to research. So he made sure that his team was as skeptical as possible, because if he were to prove the existence of the phenomenon that Terry claimed was happening on the ranch, and in his other projects as well, he would need to maintain his credibility. So they move into the ranch, and the first thing that they do, in the first year of being there, is they begin testing to make sure that all of the stories about Skinwalker Ranch were not just some miniature version of mass hysteria experienced by the family that had caused them to just make the whole incident up. So the first thing they do is they look for things like mold and plants that could be giving off hallucinogenic spores. They check the water supply to make sure it wasn't contaminated. They check for gas leaks, psychological assessments of the family. They spoke to neighbors about the family. They did everything that they could to do their due diligence and make sure the family wasn't either making it up or lying to them. And till this day, Bigelow and the researchers still think that the family was being honest. And I have to say, in more recent interviews, he seems more sure of it than ever. Now, the first year that they're there is rather bland, with only a couple of small instances happening, but nothing truly eventful takes place, nothing they can truly document. The researchers ended up coming to the conclusion that Terry and his family were definitely not hallucinating, and something really did happen to Terry and his family. They just didn't know what yet. Now, one day, when Terry and Gwen are out tagging cattle for about 40 minutes, they're out there tagging calves, and out of nowhere, the dog they have with them just starts turning and growling and going in the direction of one of the calves. And they had just tagged that calf earlier when they got there about 40 minutes ago. So they go over to the spot where this calf was, and immediately they have to call over the NIDS researchers, because what they found was frightening. They called out a veterinarian to look at this calf, and this calf they had just tagged 40 minutes ago was completely dissected and mutilated. The veterinarian didn't know what to think, because this calf had been dissected with surgical precision, as though someone had just put it on an operating table and, with a real extensive amount of medical knowledge, dissected this calf and took it apart in a way that only an expert surgeon could have done. I mean, this was precise, and the NIDS researchers did not know what to think about this. All that was left on the calf was its legs and its head, and even the tag that Terry and his wife had tagged the calf with had been removed. There was no signs anywhere that this was done by a predator, and most importantly, there was no blood anywhere. This leads to NIDS conducting a massive search of the property, because this type of occurrence was exactly what the researchers had been looking for. They were trying to find this sort of thing so they could attempt to explain it away. All of the researchers began searching the property for whoever or whatever was responsible for this cattle mutilation case. Then the guard dogs that they had kept at each of the observation posts around the ranch, which were brought in as soon as the NIDS team moved in, well, they were all cowering and looking in the same direction as each other. So the researchers, they notice this, and they start making their way towards the tree line, and they continue to make their way towards the trees where the dogs are looking, and they all just stop when Terry says, "Wait, I see something in the trees." And there's this massive wolf-like creature perched up in a tree limb, and they all see it. Terry then pulls out his rifle, and he aims it at the creature up in the tree, and everybody sees him doing this, and all of the NIDS researchers are watching as he does this, and Terry just starts firing at the wolf, and it disappears into the woods. The researchers then all fan out and begin searching for this thing, and they do find a couple of giant footsteps from the thing in the woods, but much like the first time Terry saw this wolf, the footsteps just randomly stopped. The tracks disappeared. And the researchers at this point are baffled by what they just witnessed. The researchers did not know what to think, but they did smell the same horrible stench that Terry remembered smelling during his first encounter with the Skinwalker, and they had no explanation for any of this. The researchers just end up going back to the property with no idea what to make of it, and no real evidence aside from the footprint and their own eyewitness testimony. But they couldn't make sense of how something that was that large could just escape from them in the way that it did and vanish, though it had never been there in the first place. So, over the next month, they're thoroughly searching the property. They are heavily investigating it. They're looking for more signs of this massive creature or anything that could help find this thing. Or, anything that could just point them in the right direction. But they found nothing, other than their guard dogs acting strange, as if they were hiding from something and scared to leave their cages. So, Terry and Gwen went back to doing their normal busy work around the ranch, and they passed by a corral where 4 of their prize bulls were. And these are very expensive animals. These bulls are not cheap. So, Terry and his wife take a mental note, and they're like, okay, we currently have our bulls here, we know where they are. So they drive off to do other work on the other side of the ranch and start tagging other animals, building fences, etc. A few hours later, they come back over to where the bulls were a little later and approach the first corner where they were first able to see the corral of bulls when they left. And now the bulls are gone. They're no longer in the enclosure. So Terry and Gwen are literally freaking out because these animals are extremely expensive, and it's like watching your bank account get ripped out from under you. There's no sign of these 4 bulls anywhere, and they just had left them in this enclosure, and there was no signs of a struggle either. The bulls were just gone. Now, Terry sees that the gates to the corral are still locked, and there is no sign that anything had taken place. So, there was this small trailer, though, that was nearby and right next to the enclosure. This small trailer had been wired up for years and was never used. Terry noticed that, and, he just by chance, because he doesn't know where else to look, there's no way this could be real, he goes over to this tiny enclosure, this small trailer with, he looks in the window of the trailer. This thing has never been opened in years since Terry even moved on the property or since Bigelow moved on the property. He looks inside, and Terry yells over to Gwen, and he says, "Hey, Gwen, babe, the bulls are over here. I found them. They're right here." And this startles all of the bulls out of this trance-like state that they were in. So they get the bulls out of this enclosure, which was quite literally impossible in the first place for them to be in because, for one, the doors to this enclosure were wired shut. There was no possible way that you could fit even a single bull in here, let alone 3 in the way that they had been mushed in here without, a serious fight. It just was not going to happen. But somehow these bulls were in this strange trance, and, Terry only got to see this trance for a second before screaming to his wife, and they woke up. But they did have to wrestle with the bulls and get them back in the original pen. Well, on another occasion, something similar would also happen, but it would be witnessed by Terry's friend, Deputy Sheriff Chris Porritt, only it was with heifers this time. Chris would help him find the missing cows on this occasion, and this time there was this small shed that had not been used for anything in years. There was a lot of buildings like this on the property, and this shed, just like that trailer, was wired up. You couldn't get into it, and Chris and him had to force these doors open to the shed to, even be able to peer inside. So Chris and him get these doors open, and Chris looks inside and says, "Terry, you are not going to believe this, but your heifers are in this shed stacked up and squeezed in, not fighting or anything, as though they were in a trance. It was 3 heifers in such a small space, it would have been literally impossible." Terry is in disbelief. He has no idea how this could even have happened or how they would have even fit in the shed in the first place because they are stacked on top of each other. And Chris tells him, "Hey, you're going to want to do something about this. They're stacked on top of each other." And Terry thinks they're dead, but Chris says, "No, they're not dead. There's still snot running out of that heifer's nose. They're still alive." So Chris said to go get a glass of water and dump it on that heifer's head. So Terry did. And the second that he did, the cow came right out of the trance and sprung to life. It was like they had been drugged or hypnotized. And they got the heifers out of the small shed again and back into their pen where they belonged. It's quite literally, as I mentioned already, impossible to even get one bull or heifer into either of these small confined spaces, and would take several hours to maybe even get one cow into an enclosure this small, as these 2 were, very, very, very small. And somehow, in very little time, something had managed to get multiple bulls and heifers on 2 separate occasions into 2 different small confined spaces without opening them. It was as if they had just phased through the walls, and it's just impossible. Also, let's not forget that on both occasions, the entrances were witnessed by 2 different credible people to have not been opened. So, They had to have phased through the walls. And, the NIDS researchers on the occasion with the bulls took very, very heavy interest in this. They came over to investigate the incident with the bulls, and they were just baffled because the only thing they could find was that one section of the fence enclosure had been seriously magnetized. And maybe this magnetic field, they thought, could have had something to do with the strange occurrences at the ranch. So 2 of the NIDS researchers were out on their own on the outskirts of the property using their compasses to look for magnetic fields, and they start smelling this atrocious smell again, the one that appeared the first time they saw the wolf-like creature. And suddenly their compasses just start going haywire and flickering around, the needles going crazy, and it begins to point away from north and towards wherever the smell was. They both felt that as though something was watching them. And this went on for a few moments, and as they got nearer to the smell, the smell would get stronger. They just followed the compass. But then randomly the smell just stops, and their compasses go back to normal. They're pointing north again. Magnetic fields don't just disappear like that. Then, in 1997, 2 of the NIDS researchers were up on a ridgeline overlooking the homestead, and it became commonplace for the researchers all over the property to be on the lookout for any strange occurrences that might happen at any time. And these 2 researchers were up on the ridge, kind of hidden, and they could see this strange orange orb begin to take shape right on the homestead. One of them pulls out infrared goggles and uses them to look at the orb, and the researchers can clearly make out that this was indeed an oval-shaped opening that was extremely similar to what Terry had claimed he saw one night on the ranch. This was the same oval-shaped opening that Terry claimed to have saw these creatures jumping out of on the outskirts of his property. And these researchers, they're just staring at this portal through these infrared goggles, and they see the same thing. This human-like creature jumps out of this portal and starts running up the mountain towards them, and they are literally frozen in place. They cannot move. This creature is just rocketing towards them, and it runs right past them, about 30 feet away from them, up into the mountain. They don't know what to think. They are freaked. And after 1998, the activity on the ranch just majorly declines. NIDS stays on the property for a while till 2004, but only some small stuff happens, and it seems the activity is just dying. So research was ceased, and the strange occurrences seemed to stop out of nowhere. It would seem, though, that the strange occurrences on Skinwalker Ranch maybe had finished because maybe the curse was just done, maybe it was out of steam, or, maybe the entities there just got tired of messing with everybody. Who knows? But they did end up getting a lot of footage of the lights they witnessed, among other evidence such as magnetic fields, disappearing calves that would disappear and reappear in the form of mutilations, but ultimately they came up with no hard evidence that would explain exactly what was taking place there. Robert Bigelow, though, was especially bothered by his experiences there, because him and all of the other government researchers actually ended up taking things home with them. I mean, they really did not expect this to happen because the strange occurrences literally followed them home and started affecting all of their families, the families of the workers, the families of Bigelow, and it was as though the curse of the ranch was attached to them and following them wherever they went. The researchers in Bigelow had no idea that this was going to be permanent or that it would follow them home and affect them for years to come for the rest of their lives, and it affected them in some very dramatic ways. For example, there was even a time where Robert Bigelow experienced a poltergeist type event at his own home after he had acquired the ranch, where his wife had a full-on manifestation of a human form, an apparition in her bedroom, looking at her, similar to the creatures that were appearing on the ranch and harassing the Shermans. And she told Robert Bigelow about this and explained what was happening to her while he was gone and what she saw in the bedroom and how it scared the crap out of her. And she told him, I don't know what it is. Robert also said, well, I don't know what it is either. And it were these types of events that let Bigelow know that he and his research team were truly playing with fire. This was something dangerous. And during this time, at the ranch, Robert Bigelow and the scientists were actually able to ask these things to communicate with them. And they would be able to get pictures and whatnot, but they were never able to get any solid physical evidence. Basically, the phenomenon was completely elusive. It would give the scientists a glimpse, but not enough to where they could get a solid answer to what it is that they were seeing. So the whole situation was just frustrating to everybody on the team. And it was likely that they were never able to get any control over the situation because these entities were the ones in complete control. They were just way ahead of them, and it made actual scientific testing impossible because, in Robert Bigelow's words, in a lab, you have a controlled environment and you want to have repetition occur. And you can have it versus a controlled sample so you can get scientific data on why it's happening. However, this was simply not possible on the ranch. So, what do you guys think of all this? Do you believe that this ranch is haunted or is still haunted to this day? And even now, the new owners are doing research on the ranch, and they're claiming they're getting phenomenon. They're even doing a TV show on it and all this stuff. But let me know down in the comments just what you guys think about this place. And if you enjoyed the video, please do not forget to leave us a like, subscribe, and tap the notification bell. And, that way you'll get all of our future uploads. Because we're going to be uploading a lot on paranormal and mysterious things. So if you enjoy it, especially during Halloween time, because, it's spooky season, then please stick around. And until next time, I'm MrLex, and I'll see you guys again next video.